I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Reshuffle Day. No firm news out of number 10 yet, but we'll keep you abreast of it across the entire programme. The new cabinet is expected to be in place by 3 p.m. today. Who's up, who's down, and who's out? Well, we'll be bringing you it all here on The Briefing after the headlines.
Good morning, it's 9:30. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Here are the headlines. The Prime Minister is expected to announce a mini reshuffle of his cabinet today. Rishi Sunak has to appoint a new Tory party chairman after he sacked Nadeem Zahawi over a breach of the ministerial code last month. The Times newspaper reports the Prime Minister is considering separating the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy into separate ministries. A cabinet meeting will be held at number 10 later today. Eastern Turkey has been struck by a third earthquake measuring 5.7 this morning as the number of people killed across the country and Syria has risen to above 5,000. The first 7.8 magnitude quake hit in the early hours of yesterday morning, with the second major earthquake measuring 7.5 a few hours later. Almost 6,000 buildings have been destroyed in the tremor and aftershocks that followed. The World Health Organization says the number of people killed from the earthquakes could pass 20,000. International Development Minister Andrew Mitchell told GB News UK search and rescue is expected to arrive today.
The British support, which is very specialist and very technically strong, it will land in daylight today, I hope later this morning, and it will immediately hit the ground running. And I hope that they will be able to save lives because, as I say, these first 72 hours are when it really counts. Britain supports the White Helmets, which were a civil defence group, but they are actively engaged. We've given them money before, and we will give them money again to support them once we know precisely what their requirements are.
Shadow Climate Secretary Ed Miliband is calling on the government to bring forward a proper windfall tax on energy companies after BP announced its biggest yearly profit in history. The energy giant has more than doubled its earnings from the year before, earning £23 billion in profits in 2022 after energy prices surged due to the war in Ukraine. BP Chief Executive Bernard Looney says stronger plant reliability and a lower cost of production helped with profits. TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to the briefing with Tom Harwood.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:33 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. And it's Reshuffle Day. Or could that be Reshuffle? Well, the fourth shake-up of such government departments is happening in the space of 12 months. This morning we learned that the expected cabinet meeting has been pushed back to the afternoon, meaning that we may not see all appointments and sideways moves. They might all be wrapped up not as soon as the Prime Minister had originally hoped. But what are these rumoured changes? Well, we are this morning finally expecting a new party chairman to be announced over a week after the post became vacant. But that's not all. We're also expecting departmental changes. Most importantly, perhaps, the break-up of BEIS, the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Department. Energy security is expected to become a standalone department in and of its own right. And the business part of BEIS may then fold into the Trade Department. Meanwhile, digital culture, media and sport is tipped to be divided too. Digital is tipped to spin off into a department for science, innovation and technology, merging with elements from the decimated BEIS. But who will be the personalities moved to head these fresh departments? Well, let's dive in now with Ben Glaze, the Deputy Political Editor of The Mirror. And Ben, this is a reshuffle that's coming sooner than many people had expected.
That's right. I mean, the Prime Minister needed to reappoint or to appoint a new Conservative Party chairman following Nadeem Zahawi's resignation over his tax affairs 9 days ago. But we did think that, given he'd left that vacant for over a week now, he might leave the wider reshuffle for a bit longer because, of course, we've got the ongoing debacle, if you like, of Dominic Raab, the Deputy Prime Minister, who's under investigation over bullying allegations, which he denies. And it's quite possible that in the next few days or possibly weeks that there'll be a vacancy for the Deputy Prime Minister and Justice Secretary, which might force another rearrangement of those deck chairs. But Rishi Sunak has decided to go ahead with this today, and yeah, it's underway.
It's interesting because the big departments that we're now talking about, BEIS, headed by Grant Shapps, Trade, headed by Kemi Badenoch, and DCMS, headed by Michelle Donnellan. These are names who have been at the sort of forefront, in many ways, of the government's communication agenda in recent months. So we're going to see some big disappointments here, perhaps, or some potential challenges to Rishi Sunak, perhaps squashed.
You see, those three names, they're often the ones who are sent out onto the airwaves in the mornings and then late at night to defend the government and to push the government's line. So they're trusted communicators. And I think particularly with Kemi Badenoch, it's quite interesting because, of course, she stood for the Conservative leadership and she's seen as a rising star within the Conservative Party. So I don't think she's going to be shifted to the back benches. But with the rearranging that's going on, it'll be interesting to see who comes out of it at the end of today as a winner and a loser. Because I think Grant Shapps, he briefly remember he was Home Secretary for a few days under Liz Truss earlier in the autumn. He is trusted by Rishi Sunak, so it'll be interesting to see what happens to him.
And of course, this post of party chairman that sort of instigated this whole process, there's now a new name doing the rounds in Westminster for who may well be appointed to this role, and that's the Trade Minister, Greg Hands.
Or Greg Safe Pair of Hands, as he's known in Westminster. So he's been an MP since 2005 for Chelsea, Hammersmith and Fulham in West London. He's been an Energy Minister, he's currently a Trade Minister. He's seen as a sort of a trusted pair of hands around Parliament and around the government. He's always loyal. So, yeah, putting him in charge of Conservative Party operations at CCHQ, that'd be an interesting move. I'm not sure he's got the sort of the campaigning background and the sort of zeal that one needs, really, to certainly going into an election period, because we've got the local elections coming up in May, and then, of course, an expected general election next year.
Although I did notice on his Twitter account about an hour ago, he posted a picture of him campaigning about a local bus stop in his constituency. Could that be a hint, perhaps, on where things are headed? The other point about Greg Hands, obviously, a junior minister coming into the full cabinet, that's a very neat way to tie up this situation and leaves a space for a new trade minister, perhaps the return of Connor Burns, who was fired by Liz Truss in what he believes was a very wrong set of circumstances.
That's right. There was an incident up at the Conservative Party conference in Manchester, where he was reported to whips for supposedly putting his hand on someone's knee in a bar, and then was later vindicated by an inquiry. And certainly Conor Burns' allies feel he was treated very badly. So if there was to be a way back, this could open the door for him. The other thing worth remembering, of course, is Michelle Donnellan, who's the current Culture Secretary. She's due to go off on maternity leave later this year. So there would be a natural temporary vacancy, if you like. But of course, there are various pitfalls, if you like, about rearranging when people are on maternity leave.
This is true. Just finally, I think it's important to note something that I've been pointed to by a minister today, and this is the role of William Hague in all of this. Of course, he was originally tipped to potentially become party chairman. He ruled himself out. But interestingly, reading some of his columns in the Times from the time of the leadership contest, he made some suggestions to Rishi Sunak, his successor in his seat. Some people see William Hague as his mentor. And one of those suggestions we can bring up on the screen now, where William Hague said that the new Prime Minister should appoint a Secretary of State for Science and Technology to give them the political authority to crack departmental heads together. It looks like Rishi Sunak may well be following that precise advice this morning. Should we be reading much more of what William Hague says? Is he sort of some power behind the curtain?
He's very close with Rishi Sunak. Like you say, Rishi Sunak succeeded William Hague as the MP for Richmond in North Yorkshire in 2015 when Hague stood down. Hague, he's now a peer. He's very well respected within the Conservative Party if you look back in time. But, of course, he was the leader for 4 years between 1997 and 2001, led them to another disastrous defeat. But, to be honest, whoever was leading the Tory party in 2001 would have led them to another landslide defeat. He just happened to be at the helm at the time. So the advisory role he is playing behind the scenes, that's true, that is happening, and Sunak does listen to what he says.
Really, really interesting there. We've been digging through some of those columns this morning. It looks like science and technology may well be a very important part of what takes place this morning. But now let's cross over to Downing Street to see what's going on and what is becoming a very, very busy street this morning. Oh, I do beg your pardon. Let's cross now to Westminster, where, of course, there is much going on as well. Traditionally, sackings are done not in Parliament, not in Downing Street, but in Parliament, where our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, is. Darren, what are you hearing?
Yeah, lots of public excitement this morning, Tom, here at Westminster about government ministers most people have never heard of moving to departments that they would struggle to pronounce in terms of acronyms. But we are where we are. And as you say, there is much speculation about who could be the new Conservative chairman. Lots of rumours that it would be Greg Clark taking over from Nadeem Zahawi. In terms of the transformation of those ministries, as you say, this talk about introducing a new science, technology and innovation department, potentially with digital included in that as well. And as you've suggested, this is part of Rishi Sunak's agenda. He's talked quite a lot about how he wants to make the UK a science superpower, and it would make sense to do so. I think the more interesting thing is the Department of Energy. Now, as you say, it's been consumed within the business department for the last couple of years. It used to be a standalone department. It looks like we're going to return there. Maybe not surprising, given where we're at with the energy situation in the UK, most notably, of course, concerns around energy security and the future of where we're going to get our energy from if it's going to come from inside the UK. Overall, though, we're not really expecting, I think everyone's getting terribly excited this morning, not really exciting kind of mass changes within governments. None of the big secretaries, ministries of state like the Home Office, the Foreign Office or the Treasury are likely to change. I mean, this is kind of dealing with some of the important departments, must be said, but some of them that are a little less known. In saying that, there are discussions about how important that is, if you like. I mean, how important is it to change the structures within government? Some say it's really important in the sense that it can, as you say, bang ministers' heads together. Others suggest it's just a human resources reorganisation that changes every couple of years and actually causes more harm than good.
Yeah, really, really interesting there. It will be, of course, the fourth big reshuffle in just around 12 months. Really curious to see how much actual change it will deliver once those mechanics of government have settled down. But for now, Darren McCaffrey, thank you so much for joining us there from College Green, just outside Westminster. Let's continue this discussion now with Ben Bradley, the Conservative MP for Mansfield. Of course, a former vice-chairman of the Conservative Party, someone who knows CCHQ, as it's known, very well. How important is the role of party chairman in the mechanics of all of this?
Well, really important at the minute. I think as we lead into a general election, the party chairman is responsible for organising that, in effect, for funding it, for getting boots on the ground, campaign managers and the people who deliver that in constituencies. So over the course of this next kind of 12, 18 months, really, really important, yeah. And
when we're expecting this sort of new person to be in place, the big thing coming up are these local elections. Now, alongside your role as an MP, you're also a councillor, a council leader, in fact. How are you feeling about these local elections?
I'm pleased that my council's not up this year. But it's interesting because if you look at where we were 4 years ago, the last time this round of elections came around, actually we're building on quite a low base. It was just after Theresa May had announced we were going to have another set of European elections, and I think we were on about 19% in the polls then. So it's not just a case of where we are now, but where we are relative to then in terms of election results. So I don't think it will be as bad as people predict, but certainly not easy times, is it?
That is incredibly interesting because, of course, there's been a great deal of what's known as expectation management. People saying these are going to be the worst local elections ever for the Conservative Party. If the vote is not down particularly on that big nadir from where it was under Theresa May, these were the local elections that quickly preceded her resignation as Prime Minister. Perhaps Rishi Sunak's team have been putting out all of these words that it's going to be the worst set of local elections ever, and when it's not, that might be a boost.
We all do that, don't we? We manage people's kind of thought process in that way, but in truth, that was the low ebb of the end of Theresa May's kind of premiership. Boris came into the summer, and obviously we won big in December, which is why I don't hold too much store by what the polls say kind of this far out. But you take my constituency, for example, we got 65% of the vote in the local elections, 65% of the councillors at county level 2 years ago. We've got 8% of the seats in the election that are coming up in a few months' time. So it can only really go one way.
That's really, really interesting. What do you think, then, could happen in the next year and a half, 2 years, to do that same sort of turnaround? Because looking at the polls right now, it is dire for your party. Around 20 points in the polls, 20 points behind the Labour Party on top of that. Can that be turned around?
Well, I think the proof that we've just discussed is, in 6 months from that summer of 2019 to December, it went from 20 points in the polls to an 85-seat majority. It can be. I think Rishi, government, whoever's there after today, needs to grasp the nettle on some certain issues. He picked some of the right priorities, I think, in terms of health, waiting lists, small boats and illegal migration, things that are the biggest things that come across my desk as a Member of Parliament. But if people are going to trust us on those issues enough to support us again, it's got to deliver. We've got to get to a point by the end of the year where he's met those priorities, where he has improved the economy, where we have seen waiting lists, small boats shrink significantly, if not disappear. And if we don't do that, then we're going to struggle to get the trust of the public.
Now, you were one of these poster boys post-2017 of people who could actually win in the red wall. And levelling up has been such a contentious element of the last 2-3 Prime Ministers' agendas. Is Rishi Sunak as committed to levelling up as Boris Johnson was?
Well, in the conversations I've had with him and with Jeremy Hunt, that's the phrase has been used, the language has been used. I think perhaps we've been too focused all the way through on some of the pots of capital cash. We've got announcements of levelling up funds and things like that, which are great and will help us with things like town centre regeneration. But really, that renewal, that kind of rebuilding communities in places that have been left behind very often is a long-term game, right? It's skills, it's culture, it's community support and local services. Those things don't get fixed in, one term even, they're generational. So it will take a long time to deliver. We need to see that commitment because in many ways, those capital projects and delivery, again, trusting that we can deliver the things we promise, are kind of the down payment for us to have the trust of the public to do the long-term stuff.
Now, just finally, are you keeping your phone on loud this morning? Are you expecting any potential phone calls from number 10?
I'm hoping desperately that I don't get one.
Well, Ben Bradley, thank you so much for joining us here on The Briefing. Really appreciate your thoughts, as always. Now, let's cross back to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, still there in Westminster for us. Has anything changed in the last 5 minutes, Darren?
No, unsurprisingly, Tom, it hasn't. Although we have had a tweet from Nadine Dorries. Should I tell you what she's got to say? She, of course, being the former Secretary of State at DCMS, that's the Department for Culture, Media and Sports, saying that she reckons the department works and that it's tragically lacked profile of late, despite being the most effective in Whitehall. Track record, she says, in technology, digital, gigabyte rollout, telecoms, data speaks for itself. This, obviously, on the back of we're expecting that department to lose at least one element, that is the digital element of its remit. She says that it's like Cummings, Dominic Cummings, has never left. I think it's fair to say Nadine Dorries has been slightly bitter since the removal of Boris Johnson, but she's not happy about some of the changes this morning. I think it does kind of bleed into this argument. I was trying to talk a little bit earlier on about the fundamentals of these changes, Tom, about how much difference this actually makes to the working English government, and indeed whether it actually might cause more harm than good.
Well, Darren, we know that you'll keep your ears peeled. Ears peeled? Ears to the ground, perhaps. Eyes peeled and ears to the ground. There we go, got there eventually throughout this morning. Darren, thank you very much for joining us there. Now, just finally today, China says that it strongly opposes the decision by the US to shoot down this suspected spy balloon, which was thought to be carrying surveillance of sensitive military sites. The balloon measured a staggering 60 metres in height. Now, fighter jets brought it down over the Atlantic Ocean off the south coast of, off the coast of South Carolina. Earlier, there were reports airports were closed and airspace restricted in the southeast of the country after President Joe Biden vowed to take care of it. This, however, was a week after it was first known to have crossed US airspace. China maintains it was a weather airship, which had simply blown off course. Beijing yesterday accused the US of an overreaction in shooting it down. Well, who's really telling the truth here? I'm delighted to be joined in the studio by human rights campaigner, particularly in the areas of modern slavery and human rights abuses in China, co-founder of the London-based anti-slavery charity Arise, Luke de Pulford. Luke, who should we believe here? Is this a spy balloon or a weather balloon?
Well, I think we can say quite confidently that China's excuses around this probably very likely full of hot air. They seem to have thought that it would be believable that a balloon, which seems to have had pretty sophisticated equipment on it, would have blown right off course right across the United States of America. And this comes at the same time that another balloon was found over Latin America, has not yet been downed. But the Chinese government have said about that balloon as well that this was an aircraft principally for civilian use, which had seriously deviated from course. So I think on both counts, we're looking at pretty unlikely explanations from the Chinese government. Now, it is important to underline that we don't know precisely what this balloon was for. We do know from the People's Liberation Army, so the Chinese Army's academic wings, their publications, that these kinds of balloons have been encouraged for use in China for surveillance purposes and possibly some other purposes too, like interrupting phone signals, stuff like that, signal tracking and blocking. But we don't know, and we won't know until the US has managed to recover precisely all of the parts of it, which are in, they think, about 60 feet of water. So let's see what the US Army finds and discovers about it. I guess the most crucial thing, and this was something that was hinted at yesterday by US military, is that there may have been explosives on the thing.
Wow.
Not for the purposes of causing damage to the US, but for the purposes of destroying itself, were there to be some possibility of detection or something like that. So that was the speculation from the US military. Let's see whether or not that's true.
That is really quite seismic if there indeed was some sort of explosive capability. But why on earth did it take up to 7 days for the US military, the most powerful, the most well-funded, the most sophisticated military in the world, why did it take until this piece of equipment had traversed the entirety of the continental United States before they shot it down?
Well, the argument from the United States government is that there were very good safety reasons for doing so. First of all, they wanted to make sure that it was flying over safe space. So they wanted to wait until it was in an area where they could safely shoot it down. That's the argument that's been made by the US military, and there's some truth to that. So if indeed there were explosives intended to detonate the thing, then shooting them down above civilians is not going to be a very clever idea. On top of that, there were some other safety reasons too. So those are the excuses that they're deploying. But in the States, this has become clearly a very partisan issue. House Republicans and Senate Republicans are very angry about this. They think that the Biden administration just gave this balloon a free pass to fly above the United States, collecting intelligence, very detailed intelligence at that kind of height, for a whole week. Now, the other side of this, which is important to underline because it can get carried away in a partisan argument, is that during the Trump administration, there were at least 2 of these balloons that entered into US airspace. But the Trump administration is, first of all, having denied it, is now saying that our intelligence wasn't aware of it at the time. So you could easily put the same argument to the Trump administration and say, well, hang on, you didn't deal with these balloons either. So I think against that background, we can try to give the Biden administration the benefit of the doubt. They did deal with it decisively, and they dealt with it in a way that they thought was safest. Whether or not there has been compromising intelligence gathered in that space of time, who knows?
It is remarkable that now it seems that there are a series of these balloons over a number of years. I suppose everyone just assumes that there are Chinese satellites that are looking at what we do in the UK and the EU and the US, and particularly with regard to military bases and the like. But this balloon infrastructure that we're seeing, this seems to be unusual and more acutely interventionist.
Yes, and I think that this is the key point. These balloons, in most people's analysis, don't pose a significant threat to countries. What they are, much more likely, are China pushing the boundaries, and they follow in a long thread of actions to undermine the sovereignty of other countries in the past few years. Just look at the overseas police stations that the Chinese government is thought to have been running at arm's length in various countries, including the UK. Service stations, which are there to try to ensure that the long arm of the Chinese government has a grip over diasporic communities in other countries. A total undermining of national sovereignty wherever they are, including the US. This follows in that same line. This seems to me to be the Chinese government seeing what they can get away with, seeing what kind of reaction there will be, testing the water. And I think what we have to say, and again, permit me another pun, but the US may have downed this balloon, but they certainly haven't popped the ambitions, the expansionist ambitions of the Chinese government. And that's the threat that we really need to try to face up to now.
Well, Luke de Porford, it is fascinating to talk about another kind of inflation today compared to usual. And really, I suppose, this shooting down might well have been that signal finally turning things potentially a little bit around. Luke de Porford, thank you so much for joining us this morning and talking about a really, really fascinating issue there. Now, to a final word to Ben Glaze on this entire reshuffle. We haven't seen any big announcements. We haven't seen any big moves in this programme so far. Of course, we are expecting some throughout the morning. Who are you tipping for these big roles?
Yeah, I think Greg Hands is the chap to watch for Conservative Party chairman. We've got to bear in mind as well, Grant Shapps also held that role back in 2015 very successfully when the Conservatives won an unlikely majority under David Cameron.
Of course, he denied to GB News that he would be wanting that role, but could he go back on his word?
Well, you know, if your country calls you, I suppose. But particularly with the uncertainty this morning around his department, the business department, as it's going to, as we expect, be broken up. But it does look like the role is going to go to Greg Hands, and you know he's the sort of chap who will say yes to it, I'm sure.
Well, Ben Glaze, thank you for that final word today on the show. That's it for us. We've run out of time. Coming up, it's Bev Turner Today.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you.
GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store? You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Very good morning. Welcome to Bev Turner Today on GB News. Clear your diary. There's another cabinet reshuffle today. Don't sigh. I'm sure it will change everything. The big signing, of course, will be Tory party chairman after Nadhim Zahawi lost that job a couple of weeks ago. So who would you like to see in that role? Let me know. gbviews at gbnews.uk. And the scandal of the year for me. We've had a week of energy giants reporting, you guessed it, record profits while we get stung with massive bills. This morning, BP announced that they earned £23 billion in profits last year, while Shell made a whopping $32 billion. I'll be getting angry about that with Howard Cox from Fairfuel UK. And former Special Advisor to Michael Gove, Charlie Rowley, will be alongside author Amy Nicole to discuss all the other big news stories of the day. That's all coming up after a look at your latest news with Tamsin. Don't go anywhere.
Bev, thanks very much. Good morning from the GB Newsroom. It's 1 minute past 10. The Prime Minister is expected to announce a mini reshuffle of his cabinet today. Rishi Sunak has to appoint a new Tory party chairman after he sacked Nadhim Zahawi over a breach of the ministerial code last month. The Times newspaper reports the Prime Minister is considering separating the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy into separate ministries. A cabinet meeting will be held at number 10 later today. Eastern Turkey has been struck by a third earthquake measuring 5.7 this morning as the number of people killed across the country and Syria has risen to more than 5,000. The first 7.8 magnitude quake hit in the early hours of yesterday morning, with the second major earthquake measuring 7.5 a few hours later. Almost 6,000 buildings have been destroyed in the tremor and aftershocks that followed. The World Health Organization says the number of people killed from the earthquakes could pass 20,000. International Development Minister Andrew Mitchell told GB News UK search and rescue is expected to arrive today.
The British support, which is very specialist and very technically strong, it will land in daylight today, I hope later this morning, and it will immediately hit the ground running. And I hope that they will be able to save lives, because, as I say, these first 72 hours are when it really counts. Britain supports the White Helmets, which were a civil defence group, but they are actively engaged. We've given them money before, and we will give them money again to support them once we know precisely what their requirements are.
Journalist Iona Sakoufakis told GB News about the rescue efforts in the Turkish town of Adana.
Adana, this city is one of the most affected ones. It's one of the 10 most affected cities in Turkey. Right now, if you can see behind me, right a second ago, they actually found someone. The teams here that just managed to get someone out. And they're just taking him to the ambulance.
An underwater search for missing mother Nicola Bully is still underway in the River Wyre. It's been 11 days since Miss Bully went missing after taking her dog for a walk in St Michael's on Wyre in Lancashire. The search follows a fresh appeal by her partner, who said her two daughters desperately miss her and need her back. Forensic search specialist Peter Folding says they need to rule everything out.
Somebody could have put the phone on the bench. Somebody could have found it and put it on the bench, just on the nearest bench. We don't know. Nobody knows. This is a complete mystery, this whole thing. And normally, if somebody falls in the water, if Nicola went in here,